The sunset drifts down over Clarksville, Tennessee. An old man with silver hair sits alone in a small wooden cabin, his calloused hands gently plucking the worn strings of a guitar. The sound that drifts through the room is slow, rough, and mournful, as if the instrument itself were telling the story of its owner, a man who once made all of Nashville fall silent to listen, yet disappeared from the spotlight without a single word of farewell. Before Willie Nelson or Waylon Jennings ever sang about the lonely cowboys of the open plains, there was one man who had already written that story, a man whose name, today, few still remember, Ed Bruce. He was the mind behind the legendary hit, "Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys," a song that earned others a Grammy, but left its very creator to live in the shadows. For more than half a century, Ed Bruce was more than just a singer. He was a storyteller. He wrote about loneliness, honesty, and faith, the very things Nashville often hides beneath its glittering lights. But behind that warm baritone voice and calm, steady smile was a life full of cracks and quiet pain. Years of poverty, a broken marriage, and in the end, a silent retreat from the world he once helped illuminate. Today's story is not only about a musician who has passed away, it is about the price of truth, the cost of loyalty to one's art, and why sometimes those who write the immortal songs are the very ones the world forgets first. If you've ever sung along to the line, "Don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys," then perhaps it's time you learned the truth about the man who wrote it. Before Nashville ever knew him as the cowboy poet, Ed Bruce was just a poor boy growing up among the endless white cotton fields of Kaiser, Arkansas. He was born in the winter of 1939 in a small wooden house where the wind slipped through every crack and the faint sound of a neighbor's radio was the only thing that broke the silence. It was a time when America was still struggling to recover from the Great Depression. And for a Southern child like Ed, the only dream worth having was simply to make it through the next winter. But Ed Bruce was different. While other children ran through the fields, he would sit quietly in front of an old radio, listening to the voices of Ernest Tubb, Hank Williams, and the gospel hymns echoing from the Baptist church every Sunday morning. From the very beginning, music was never just a pastime. It was faith. When Ed was 10, his family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, the borderland where country met rock and roll. That city was a furnace of sound, where legends were being born. Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis. Young Ed would often walk past Sun Records and dream that one day he too would stand inside that small studio, guitar in hand, singing a story of his own for the world to hear. At 17, that dream came true, if only for a moment. Ed walked into Sun Records with a song he had written himself. Producer Jack Clement took notice and passed the tune along to the label's founder, Sam Phillips, the man who had discovered Elvis. Phillips nodded. A small contract, a few recording sessions, and the boy from Arkansas became part of the new wave of American music. But fame never came easy. His first song went unnoticed. The radio stations refused to play it. Memphis, a city where everyone dreamed of stardom, could be cold to those who weren't lucky enough. Yet Ed never gave up. He kept writing, kept singing, and kept believing that if he remained true to the music, one day, Nashville would have to listen. And in those years, caught between dream and reality, the image of the lonely cowboy began to take root within his soul. A traveler of sound, walking between faith and sorrow, carrying only his guitar and his honesty as his companions. "I wasn't born to be famous," Ed once said. "I was born to tell the stories no one else dared to tell." The 1960s arrived, But Nashville still wasn't ready for Ed Bruce. Record labels saw in him a fine voice, yet they didn't know where he belonged. He wasn't soft enough for pop country, nor wild enough to stand beside the Outlaws. In an era where fame belonged only to those who had both talent and luck, Ed had plenty of the first, but none of the latter. For nearly a decade, he drifted from one record label to another, RCA, Epic, then Monument. At each stop, he managed to record just a few songs, tracks that later generations would rediscover and call the forgotten rough gems of Nashville. But at that time, they brought him nothing but small checks and long, lonely nights on the road. To keep his family fed, Ed did everything he could. He wrote advertising jingles, recorded demos for other singers, sometimes drove trucks or sang in dimly lit bars across Tennessee. Those who met him said he always carried a small notebook, jotting down every line, every story, every sadness from the wandering souls he met. Because that's how a songwriter listens to the world, he used to say. Amid those struggling years, Ed met Patsy Bruce, a young woman working in advertising, with bright eyes and an unshakable faith in his talent. She became more than his wife. She was his co-writer, his creative partner, and the first to tell him, "You were born to write about the lonely ones." That companionship kept him tethered to music, even as Nashville repeatedly closed its doors in his face. By the mid-1970s, after dozens of rejected songs, Ed still refused to stop. One autumn night in 1975, inside a small rented room in Nashville, he wrote the song that would define his entire career. "Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys." It wasn't just a song, it was a declaration, the anthem of a generation of Southern artists who felt misunderstood, overlooked, yet proud to keep the cowboy spirit alive in their hearts. But even after writing that masterpiece, Ed Bruce still wasn't recognized. He recorded the first version himself, but the song slipped quietly past the charts. Nashville turned its back on him once more. "I wrote for people like me," Ed said in an interview years later, "because no one else was willing to sing about them." No one could have known that just a few years later, when Waylon, Jennings, and Willie Nelson recorded the song together, the whole of America would stop to listen, and Ed Bruce's name would finally be written into history, even if only as a small line in the credits below. In 1978, Nashville finally woke up. The two biggest names of the outlaw country movement, Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, joined forces to record the song Ed Bruce had once written in solitude. "Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys." When that melody first hit the radio waves, America heard itself in it. The loneliness, the pride, the quiet sorrow only the South could truly understand. The song became a nationwide phenomenon, soaring straight to #1 on the Billboard Country chart and earning Waylon and Willie a Grammy Award for Best Country Performance by a Duo or Group. But amid the applause and flashing lights of Los Angeles, the name Ed Bruce appeared for only a single brief second, tucked quietly beneath the words, "written by." He, the man who had penned the story of the Cowboys, now stood at the edge of the very legend he had created. And yet instead of bitterness, Ed Bruce called it a small miracle from God. For him, the real victory wasn't about who held the trophy. It was that the song had finally found the right hearts to sing it. From that moment on, Nashville began to look back at the quiet man they had long overlooked. And, for the first time, Ed Bruce was offered a major record deal with MCA Records, one of the leading labels of the 1980s. In 1982, he released the album, "You're the Best Break This Old Heart Ever Had." Its title track shot to #1 on Billboard's country chart, And Ed, at the age of 43, finally became a true star. His deep, soulful voice resonated with grown-up listeners, those who had loved, lost, and still believed in the gentleness of country music. Audiences began to see in him not just a songwriter, but a storyteller of the American South. And he didn't stop there. Ed Bruce also stepped into television. In 1981, he starred alongside James Garner in the TV series Bret Maverick, playing Tom Guthrie, an honest, quiet man, the very kind of true cowboy Ed had always sung about. His acting career brought him wider recognition, but Ed often reminded people, music is blood. Acting is just how I rest between songs. The early 1980s marked the brightest years of his life. Songs like Ever Never Lovin' You, My First Taste of Texas, and After All climbed into the top 10 of the charts. Ed Bruce, the man who had been forgotten for 2 decades, now stood proudly on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, dressed in a simple brown suit, gazing out at the full auditorium with a quiet smile. The spotlight had finally found him, but it had come late, and like every light in Nashville, it was never meant to last forever. Just as the spotlight finally began to smile on Ed Bruce, his private life slowly began to fracture. Behind the tours and the applause, Ed remained a simple Southern man, a believer in God, in love, and in quiet living. But Nashville, with its restless rhythm and endless nights, was never a place built for peace. Since the early 1960s, Ed had been married to Patsy Bruce, the woman who was not only his wife but also his musical soulmate. Patsy had worked in advertising, energetic, intelligent, and gifted with a sharp artistic instinct. She was the one who co-wrote Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys with Ed, and the only person who truly believed in that song when all of Nashville turned a blind eye. Together, they built a small publishing company, managed his tour schedules, and raised 3 children in a modest house in the suburbs of Franklin, Tennessee. But fame and the endless miles of the road slowly carved a distance between them. While Ed was traveling from city to city, Patsy carried both the business and the family on her shoulders. Every time he came home, the house was still warm, but the silence between them grew a little heavier. Both knew that the love once nourished by music was now being tested by it. Still, Ed never stopped being grateful to her. In a 1984 interview, he spoke softly. "Patsy understands me better than anyone. She knows when I write out of joy and when I write out of pain." After more than 20 years together, they quietly parted ways. There were no headlines, no accusations, just 2 people who had once loved deeply, now unable to find each other amid the distance and the echoes of the past. For Ed, it was a loss greater than any contract or award. Love had once been his refuge. Now it became an emptiness no stage could fill. Later, he met Judy Woodley, a gentle private woman working in media in Tennessee. Judy gave him something that neither fame nor success ever could: peace. They lived together in a small house in Clarksville, where mornings began with Ed brewing coffee and Judy sitting on the porch reading her Bible. He said it was the first time in years he had truly felt at home. For Ed Bruce, love was never about grand declarations. It was about quiet afternoons, the soft hum of a guitar, and the gaze of a woman who understood him without words. It was what he had searched for in Nashville, and only found at the end of his life. "I spent years learning one simple truth," he once wrote in his notebook. "Not every song needs a stage. Some songs are meant to be sung only in the house where you love someone. The glow of Nashville's spotlight never lasts long. For Ed Bruce, it had arrived late, and it left quietly. After a string of successes in the early 1980s, radio tastes began to shift. New, younger voices emerged. Country music turned more commercial, glossier, and less raw. And Ed, and with his slow storytelling style and classic cowboy baritone, suddenly became too real for a world that had grown fond of imitation. Record labels, one by one, turned him away. Albums like Night Things and Homecoming received little promotion. His songs were played less and less on the radio, and his name stopped appearing among Nashville's contemporary stars. Yet Ed Bruce never complained. He understood that music, like life itself, has its seasons. What broke him wasn't fading fame. It was the feeling of being forgotten. People still sang, "Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys." But few remembered that the man who wrote it was still alive, still sitting in a small Tennessee room, quietly scribbling melodies no one would hear. The man who once made all of Nashville listen now spoke only to himself through the sound of a lonely guitar. For a time, Ed nearly vanished from the public eye. He left the stage, declined invitations to perform, and devoted himself to writing gospel songs and working with local churches. In one rare interview, he said only this: "I never left music. I just left the illusion that music needs fame." For him, music had returned to where it began, in faith. By the late 1990s, Ed Bruce re-recorded some of his old songs and released them through an independent label. They didn't make headlines, but he remained steadfast, writing the way a man prays. His lyrics grew deeper, less about cowboys, more about the soul, faith, and redemption. But then his health began to fade. Sleepless nights, brief heart pains, canceled shows due to exhaustion. Still, Ed never complained. He told a close friend, "I've sung about cowboys all my life. Now it's time I live like one." Quiet, free, and alone. By his twilight years, Nashville had almost forgotten him. Yet in Clarksville, every Sunday afternoon, neighbors would still see Ed Bruce sitting on his porch, playing the old songs in a rough, husky voice. Peaceful at last. No more audience, no more stage lights, but something he had long lost had returned: serenity. "I was never a star," he once wrote in his journal. "I was just a storyteller, until the day God tells me it's time to be silent." When a song outlives the man who wrote it, it becomes more than music. It becomes legacy. For Ed Bruce, that legacy began with a tune written in solitude and ended with an entire nation singing along. "Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys" was not just an anthem of the outlaw country movement. It was a declaration of freedom, of courage, and of the Southern soul that refused to compromise. It spoke for those who dared to live honestly, to love deeply, and to hold on to their cowboy pride in a world that was changing too fast. The line, "Don't let them be doctors and lawyers and such," might sound like a joke, but in truth, it was a sigh for those who chose integrity over fame. From then on, Nashville gave Ed Bruce a title reserved only for the few who stayed true: the cowboy poet of Tennessee. His music was never showy, never dependent on bright lights. All he needed was a guitar, a deep voice, and a sincere heart. That voice became an inspiration for generations to come, from Toby Keith, Alan Jackson, and Garth Brooks, to Chris Stapleton and the new storytellers trying to bring truth back into country music. But Ed Bruce's legacy went beyond music. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, he was an active voice in social causes, supporting Farm Aid, the movement founded by Willie Nelson and John Mellencamp to help struggling American farmers. He performed at benefit shows, using his voice to fight for the families losing their land, people he called the true backbone of America. Few know that Ed also joined a children's book project alongside other Nashville artists, aiming to teach kids about honesty and independence, values he believed his country was slowly forgetting. In public talks, he openly supported equality in music, speaking out against gender bias and discrimination, even advocating for acceptance of LGBTQ artists. Music, he once said, is the only place where you don't need a passport or a gender to belong. Quiet though he was, Ed Bruce's image remained imprinted in American popular culture. That cowboy hat, the kind eyes, and the husky voice appeared across television, magazines, and posters of the 1980s. He represented the old American archetype, honest, reserved, blending faith, dignity, and loneliness. In 2018, at nearly 80 years old, Ed Bruce received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Arkansas Country Music Awards. When he stepped onto the stage, he didn't give a long speech. He simply smiled, bowed his head, and said, "I'm just a storyteller, and God was kind enough to let me sing my stories out loud." The audience rose to their feet in a long, heartfelt applause, not for a legend, but for a man who had stayed true. He reminded them that in the world of country music, what endures isn't the charts, it's sincerity. In his later years, Ed lived quietly with Judy Woodley in Clarksville. Each morning, he brewed coffee, opened the windows to let the sunlight in, and sat with his worn-out guitar while Judy read her Bible. He wrote, not for money, not for fame, but for a love that had never faded. Together, they called his final project After Hours. "It's the music of the quiet hours," Judy said, "when Nashville has gone to sleep, but Ed's heart is still singing." When listeners revisited those recordings, they realized he was no longer singing to be heard, but to give thanks. And perhaps that was Ed Bruce's true rebirth, a man who had traveled the long road from spotlight to stillness, from fame to faith. A life that did not end in applause, but in peace, carried softly in every note he left behind. The winter of 2021 settled over Clarksville in a blanket of pale mist. The hills turned brown with frost, and the wind slipped through every crack of the wooden house. Inside, where Ed Bruce had lived with Judy, there were no more keystrokes, no new lyrics, only the scent of pine, the ticking of a clock, and a guitar leaning quietly against the wall, as if waiting for a familiar hand. On the table, his notebook lay open to the last page, where a shaky but clear line was written in his own hand. "Music is the only prayer I've ever known how to say." On January 8th, 2021, Ed Bruce took his final breath in Judy's arms. There were no cameras, no stage lights, only a gentle wife beside him and a soft song playing in the background. "My first taste of Texas." When the chorus came, Judy said he smiled, the last smile of a man who had walked his whole journey between faith and music. The news of his passing drifted through Nashville like a quiet wind, gentle, yet deeply felt. Country radio stations across America replayed, "Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys." At the Grand Ole Opry, the audience stood in silence for 1 full minute before the music rose again, husky, warm, as if Ed himself were singing with them from somewhere beyond. On social media, names like Alan Jackson, Toby Keith, and Travis Tritt shared his image with the same simple caption, a true storyteller, a Southern heart that never stopped beating. The funeral was small, just like the way he had lived. No lavish flowers, no velvet ropes of fame, only friends, family, and a few neighbors who had once heard him sing on quiet Sunday afternoons. Judy placed a fountain pen and a blank sheet of paper atop his coffin. So that if, somewhere beyond this life, Ed wanted to keep writing, he would have what he needed. After the service, she opened their small home studio, the room where they had worked together. Inside a drawer, she found 3 unreleased recordings: After Hours, The Man Behind the Song, and Prayer in the Wind. Each song sounded like a tender confession. No bitterness, no regret, only gratitude and peace. In Prayer in the Wind, Ed's rough, weary voice sang, "If I could start again, I'd still be that cowboy, chasing a song instead of a fortune." As the sun dipped behind the Tennessee hills, people said they could still hear the sound of Ed Bruce's guitar carried in the wind. No one knew if it was real or just memory. His music had melted into the land, the sky, and the very breath of the American South. No more stage lights, no more applause. Yet his melodies lived on, in the hearts of those who believe that country music isn't just sound. It's life itself. Ed Bruce is gone, but the stories he told remain, drifting through the Tennessee fields, where every note carries the scent of the earth, and every chord is a prayer whispered to the wind. And now, as the old guitar still rests there, its steel strings trembling softly whenever the wind passes through, it feels as though his music still lingers, breathing through the air of the American South. Ed Bruce may have stepped away from Nashville's lights, but the stories he told continue to be sung, in small bars, on local stages, and in the hearts of those who still believe in the true spirit of country music. He didn't just write about cowboys. He was their soul, honest, steadfast, and quietly enduring in a world full of noise. When you listen again to Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys, remember, it isn't just a song. It's the message of a man who lived fully through music, through faith, and through kindness. The very things Nashville will forever remember him for. "I didn't leave behind wealth," Ed Bruce once said. "I left behind songs. And if someone is still singing them, that means I'm still here." Perhaps the most beautiful thing about Ed's life wasn't fame, but the truth that even in silence he could still make the world listen. Today, if you too believe that country music is more than just sound, that it is memory and the heartbeat of America, then like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to join us in keeping these untold stories alive, the real souls, the true voices that built an era. And don't forget to share your thoughts below. Which song by Ed Bruce moved you the most? We'll read every single comment, because it's you, the listeners, who keep stories like Ed Bruce's from ever fading away.